In today's episode of our photography review show, we're gonna be reviewing 28 photographers and their 61 images. Hello everybody, and welcome to the next episode of our photography review show. I hope you had a great week, I hope you're enjoying the Valentine's Day today, and I hope that you're ready for another portion of photography reviews. If you've never been here before, my name is Jakub. I'm a professional photographer based in West Sussex, England, and for the past 6 or 7 months I've been reviewing photos here at the Clever Photographer. Now it's been very popular, and that's the reason why we had to limit the numbers to 1 or 2 photos per week per photographer, and for the same reason we also take the show and divide it between 3 different parts. We usually start by the landscape photographers, then we look at the mixed team photography, and we end up by the rest of the photography styles. Now before we jump into the reviews, I have 2 things I want to remind you. First one is about our new Facebook group. It's called Clever Photographer Academy. You can come and join us, it's for free. Just search on Facebook for Clever Photographer Academy. And what we do there, we talk all things photography, we run regular photography competitions, we also answer your photography questions, and we review your photos throughout the week. So if you haven't joined us yet, make sure you head there and join us today. And the second thing, we need to look at the photographer of the week from the last episode. So let's do that right now. And here we are with one of the most popular parts of the photography review show. It's time to look at the photographer of the week from the past episode, which was 7th of February 2022. Now, the photographer of the week last week was John Dalston and his portrait or dramatic portrait portfolio. Now, why I'm saying that is that John has been photographer for over 15 years, and he obviously really liked to capture many different photography styles. Now, as he say himself, his popular and favorite styles are portrait photography or people photography, and then animal or pets portraits. So this is why also John has several Instagram accounts, and the first one we're looking at is his portrait Instagram account. So obviously when you look at the portraits themselves, as you can see, they kind of showcase the first thing we really like, and something what we always look at the photographers, and that's a recognizable style. So that is something what's really important. You start by learning how to improve your technical skills, then you look for the right composition, and then to put it together you have to create your own photography style. So when somebody look at your images, they want to look at the images and say, oh yeah, they belong to John, so that's John's photos. That's easily recognizable, and I think that's something what he really manages very well. Other than the fact that John is very good at working with light, also working with drama, working with the subject, I think all the combination together really works very well. His portrait photography across is very good, but I really like the black and white photography as well. I think lots of people think that photographers can hide behind black and white photography, but that's actually not the case at all. Black and white photography shows even the smallest mistakes, and I think John does a great job by showing his models and people in the best light possible. So if you want to see more of John's work and you want to look at his portrait photos, here is his portfolio for the portraits. Here is actually his starting point where you want to go and learn more about John. So then there are different links. So as I said on the beginning, this is obviously a mixture of different styles of photography, and then we go into the pets. There is some semi-cuts right here, there is more cuts here, and then finally there are the portraits here. So John, congratulations, well done. We love your photos, so keep shooting and make sure you keep sending us more photos in the future. And the same goes for all of you folks. If you want to become our photographer of the week, or if you simply want to have your photos reviewed, make sure that you join us. Head to our website cleverphotographer.com/review, where you can find all the upcoming dates, all the upcoming links, and more information about how you can join us already next week. So that is out of the way, and now let's jump into the actual reviews. And here we are with the second part of the show where we're going to be looking at the photographers with the mixed team photography. What does it mean? It means that basically the photographers send us multiple pictures with different photography styles. For example, like macro and wildlife, travel and landscape, portrait and landscape, and so on. I'm sure you get the hint. We have 10 photographers to look at, so let's jump straight into it. But before that, just please make sure to remember to give us a like to the video, comment, and also follow our channel so we can continue creating content like this. But now, without any further ado, let's jump straight into it. So starting with Donna here, we have this beautiful capture on almost a kind of macro capture and then wildlife capture of the bird right here. So 2 pictures to look at. So let's jump into the camera details. Starting right here, Nikon D850, 70 to 200 millimeters, and the settings were ISO 640, 200 millimeters, so all the way with your zoom, f3.5, 1/5000th of a second. So obviously with 1/5000th of a second, you get almost this frozen moment, which kind of work. However, obviously with ISO 640, you will get an additional noise, as I know you're aware of. So that's just something to kind of think of. As always, I'm not 100% sure what was the speed of the animal, if 1/5000th of a second was completely necessary. Also really depends on the lighting condition and everything. The light is quite nice, although you get some harsh parts here, so I'm assuming that it was maybe a little bit stronger than you would kind of want. However, I think it still look very cool. There are parts which are really sharp. Some of them are just a little bit softer towards here, and some parts of the flower, so it's really kind of full on with the depth of field with the f3.5. That's probably what you get with 200 millimeters. I really like the background. I like how it's kind of blurry. However, there is still the kind of mixture of different colors. I think it sets the scene quite nicely. And other than the high ISO and maybe just kind of reviewing the shutter speed, I think technically it's quite well done. Now, looking at this one, we are, let's have a look, with the same camera and same lens. So we are looking at still Nikon D850. This time the settings were ISO 800, still 200 millimeters, so really punched in, and f4 and 1/5000th of a second. So this is a little bit cleaner result, I think, compared to here. Also because there's probably a lot happening here. Now here, I really like the fact that most of the bird and also most of the flower is in focus. I think that works really well. Sometimes you can get the wings in a little bit of movement, which is not necessarily a problem, but this also looks very cool. So I guess the 1/5000th of a second work for here. The ISO 800 didn't do that much of a damage, so that makes me think that maybe the light was a little bit better here. And when you look at it in overall, other than maybe few shadows here, it is a little bit more even lit with a little bit less harsh shadows. Now the background is a little bit flat. I mean, it's not very saturated, and this time, you know, it's almost blurred to the point when you just kind of recognize 2 colors. There are no shapes. However, it still works together. It's just in the combination with the bird, the colors are very similar, so the contrast isn't really pushed there. Compare, for example, the flower in the background. I think that really works, where with the color of the wings and some parts of the bird very much kind of blending with the background. So that's just technically something to kind of look at. When we talk about composition, this is very lovely. I really like how the flower starting from the corner and pointing out, and then having the whole bird interacting with the flower, kind of hanging in like this, is just beautiful and excellent capture. So I think as a composition goes, it's very nice. If you would really want to add emphasis on the actual bird and make it a little bit more cinematic, I think something like a 16 or 9 would also work very well. We would kind of get reduce of some of the extra background and maybe part of the flower, and we would really focus on the bird. This is now a very trendy crop, also because people recognize it a lot from TV. Obviously, people who ever watched the recent televisions would be looking at this crop, so the eyes get used to it and they have no problem by focusing on a bird and a flower at the same time. So that's one option you can kind of look at. This one I think quite work on a square. I think it's a quite nice idea. Obviously, the flower there being as a base together with the bee or wasp or something climbing on it, I think it's quite nicely done. There is a lovely space above and below, which I think really works together with the behind. I think the main subject is clear. The depth of field works quite nicely here. So I think overall it's a nice composition too, Donna. Now, when it comes to post-processing, there isn't really much differently I would do. I think the contrast is nice. The shadow highlights just kind of keep looking in the shadowy area, just making sure that you have some details there. Also, maybe because you were kind of pushing the post-processing a little bit, some parts starting to look a little bit like a watercolor. That can be when we try to do a little bit of noise reduction. Sometimes that's what it turned into. And also, I wonder if you could have pushed the sharpness just a little bit more. Other than that, it's quite natural, very saturated, but quite nice. On this one, I would push the saturation a little bit more, not necessarily saturation, maybe just the vibrance to something like this. And if I would crop it like this, I would, just as usual, add the vignette just to bring more focus on the actual main subject. But other than that, it's lovely done. Excellent captures. Donna, thank you very much for sending them over. It was a pleasure to review them for you. Take care, stay safe, and I hope to see more of your pictures soon. Now we're talking about Evgeniy. Evgeniy sent us this cat here, sitting in a room, playing with something like a pink or red ball. And then we have this flower right here with a lovely black background. So let's have a look at them. Let's have a look if we have any camera details, and we do. So Pentax camera, ISO 200, 170 millimeters. So really kind of zoom in on this one. F9.5, 1/250 of a second. Well, actually, technically very, very well done, kind of macro capture with the beautiful flower in the foreground being all in sharp, which I think works really, really well, except a little bit of softness at the back. Then the other one is soft but still recognizable, which creates very nice pair and something that works very nicely together with a lovely bouquet, almost like background. I think technically this is very, very well done, Evgeniy. Well done, congratulations, excellent job. Now, talking about this one, that's a lovely capture. Still the same camera, ISO 200, 100 millimeters, so quite good distance. F9, 1/125th of a second. So the light is very, very nice. The backlight always works very, very well. The shadow is lovely here as well. I just wish there would be the rest of it there. I think that would kind of complete the scene a little bit. Obviously, the sharpness is very good. The depth of field is very good as well. The cut is all in focus, and then you get this kind of gradual softness towards the end. So put it like this together, I think it's very lovely. Now, staying with the image and talking about composition, this is where I think it would have been cooler if you could even get reduce of some of the part here, and you would kind of wish that you have the rest of the cut and the rest of the shadow in the image, because I think that's what it really is about. It's about the cut, of course, but then the light hitting from behind and creating this lovely shadow here would work quite nicely together, I think. Still lovely details, beautiful posture, lots of space around, beautiful light. So altogether, nothing really wrong. Those are just some tips on what you could do with the image. When it comes to composition here, I think it's really nicely done. If I would want to be really, really picky, I prefer when you shoot something in pair like this, I prefer when there is the same amount of space on each side of the element, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think all together like this with the kind of base created with the green works very nicely, and it's well done. Sticking with the image and looking at the post-processing, I would focus on the editing here, where you can see some of the background removal and some of it is still here and visible. So that would be probably my biggest thing to do. And also just kind of looking at the edges, making sure they are a little bit more gradient. However, I'm not that crazy. I'm not that bothered by this part, or it's more here where it's visible because it's kind of sharp edges which are standing out. Other than that, I think the saturation is nice, the light is nice, the white balance is nice, the gradient around works very, very well. So it's just to look at these parts. So when I open the shadows, you really want all of this to disappear rather than still being visible. So you could push the shadows down a little to do something like this. Then moving on this one, talking about post-processing, actually nothing much I would do there. This would look brilliant in black and white as well, as usually those backlit pictures do. Obviously there is not much colors happening here neither. That's why I think the black and white would look lovely as well. Since we don't have the rest of the shadow, you could turn it to black and white and use the 16:9 as well here and get something like this and really punch in on the cut and get something nice like this. Evgeniy, thank you very much for sending your pictures over. It's a pleasure to review them. Take care, stay safe, and hope to see you and speak to you soon. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a Ken. Ken unusually haven't sent us birds this week, so we're gonna look at these two images. So Ken, kind of moment from the beach with a lovely sunset, lots of people, part of palm, and then sunset somewhere on a coast with a little bit of sun blur here. Well, let's have a look at the details. So Nikon Coolpix, this one is P1000. The settings were ISO 100, 32.2 millimeters, f4.5, 1/500th of a second. So technically, I mean, when I just kind of open the shadows and see what was the details there, technically the sharpness is quite nice. So that's quite nicely done. The camera or lens or sun kind of leak and burn here, it's a little bit too visible for me. I don't, if it was intentionally done like this, it's fine. I'm not 100% sure about it. Also, the blur around the actual sun is a little bit too visible for me, so you need to kind of look at the ways of how to photograph this. When it comes to scene like this, I usually like to stay around f7, f9, simply because I want to have everything in focus, and I think anytime I go to the extreme of having a really low f-stop or high f-stop, I start to get artifacts like this, and it's better to kind of avoid them. Other than that, quite nice scene, a lovely texture in the sky, epic sunset, a nice reflection here, so that's where I would leave it. Moving on, this one, ISO 100, f4.5, 1/250th of a second, so you have the people sharp, so that's a good thing. You have still nice sky here, still a little bit of texture. This part isn't really lit anymore, so I'm not 100% sure about it. However, technically, I think it's still well captured. Now, when we move to the composition, I think there is a lot happening here, and it's a little bit tricky to say what you're trying to kind of show. You have these two people here, which are kind of half cut. As probably you know by now, I'm not a huge fan of cutting things off. Same with the chairs here, same with the palm tree. So I know you're kind of trying to show a lot of different things. The frame, the composition isn't necessarily balanced, so it's just a lot happening, and it's a bit difficult to pick what exactly you're trying to show. Is it the people on the beach? Is it the couple? Is it the palm? Is it the sunset on the beach? Just lots happening here, Ken, so something to kind of think of. Usually it's easier to pick a few elements over many, or if many, then more than this and with less details, so then you have like a crowd, but you can't really recognize individuals, like in this case. On this one, when it comes to composition, I would personally probably crop out this part because I think it's just a distraction. I think my main subject would be the tree and the sun. So what I would do with it, I would do something like this, straighten it to make sure that my horizon is straight, and then what I would do, I would make sure that my sun is in a center. So I would come out from it with something like this, I think. Then I would work on removing this part, which can be done easily with the brush, with just kind of black, and really do something like this and create almost like a silhouette effect, which I think would, no, not here, which I think would look quite cool here. And you would get something a little bit stronger, I think. So this is the kind of before after the editing, and then really the main focus and subject goes onto the tree and the sun, and it creates quite epic scene with a little bit of reflection and color here. Focusing again on the sun, I think it would look much cooler. Now we can put a little bit more temperature and tint, and that's where I would leave it. So this is what I would do with it when it comes to post-processing and composition can. On this one, I'm not 100% sure. We could make it a little bit more silhouette-like, really push the blacks, close the shadows, and let the sky stand out with the temperature to do something like this. But just the composition is a little bit complicated. Anyway, either way, Ken, I'm happy to see something a little bit different. I'm happy to see that you're trying something different. Well done. Keep shooting, and make sure you send it over so we can check it out next time. Moving on, the next photographer, we have a Mitch, and Mitch sent us 2 pictures. Now, with the first one, it's clear. It's a portrait, a sea-size portrait with some nice waves and everything. And on this one, I'm not 100% sure if it's a picture. It looks like it's a photo of an image or painting. So I'm not really going to review that. I have nowhere enough skill to review that, but we can talk about this one. It's a Fujifilm camera, 18-55, ISO 200, 31.5 millimeter, f6.4, 1/1700 of a second. So ISO 200 will give you a little bit of noise, which I think here it's kind of visible on the sky, not crazily by this, but then also on the person itself, you can see the kind of grains around the lady a lot. So that's something to keep an eye on. ISO f6.4 is fine. Obviously you have 2 artistic decisions. Either put the f-stop high to somewhere like f11 and then have everything sharp, or as low as possible and then get just the lady sharp and then kind of gradual softness towards the background to create nice depth. Now 1/1700 of a second seems to be like really fast, which I don't think is necessarily needed. I don't think the lady was sprinting anywhere, so I think you could go way down and really underexpose it a little bit and get a little bit more details. Now the light isn't great, however it is in the worst too. I'm assuming it was kind of bright day. However, there are no really crazy shadows except this one. And if we move to the composition, and this is similar to Evgeniy moment ago, when you work with the shadows, when you show the shadows, it's really good practice to show the full shadow. Then if you have really defined shadow like this, it would be good to actually include it in the frame itself. It always looks good. It kind of finishes the story and the scene and just makes it all a bit nicer. So that's about that. Composition, yeah, that's what I was saying. I think the waves and the leading line of flow works quite nicely. I would probably bring down the f-stop a little bit lower if possible to create a little bit more depth of field. Other than that, it's nice. That's the shadow I would kind of think of and leave it there. And post-processing, yeah, I mean, because of the light, the colors are a little bit like monotone colors, but that's not a big deal. I think it's still quite nice. We can have a look at what would Lightroom do with the white balance, but really there is no difference, so we leave it the way you done it. We add a little bit of vignette to add a little bit more kind of gradient on the top, just to bring the attention towards the foreground, and we leave it there. So Mitch, thank you very much for sending the photo over. Keep shooting and send us your pictures as soon as you can. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Murray. Murray, we have 2 images from you. So one is almost like a cathedral ceiling. Now, if you've been watching any of my social media accounts, I've been doing this a lot now. Obviously, we are in the middle of towards the end of the winter here in UK, and the weather isn't greatest, so I'm hitting anything what's open where you can photograph. So cathedrals are now my thing, so I'm doing this a lot. This is very, very lovely, and I would add a little bit of work to it, but it's still very nice. And then a little bit of still life right here with nice reflection, something we can also look at. So let's start with this one. Let's have a look at the camera details. Nikon D7000, Tamron 18-400, and from the camera settings, ISO 5000, 18mm f10, 1/50th of a second. So personally, when I go and shoot like something like this, if you are just like me in a places where you can't use tripod, number one, f-stop, I always have it as low as possible. I don't know what your camera allows you to, but I usually stick around f4, and making sure that my focus point is on the top of the building. So I want to have the top, which is the main thing I'm going to be photographing sharp, and then see what else going to come out of it. By doing that, then I can move to the shutter speed, where quite rightly 1/50th of a second is just around the spot where you can handheld your camera. Depending on your image stabilization, depending on the gear, about 1/50th of a second is when you can handheld the camera. And then you want to do the HDR kind of sampling, 0, 1, plus, minus, plus, so the bracketing. And usually the underexposed -1 is the one which I use. And I usually end up around ISO 800, ISO 400. It really depends on the light inside of the place. 5,000, even for my 5,000, ISO 5,000, even for my camera is quite high, and that's why you end up with lots of noise like this. Noise towards the point when you start to use the texture and you lose the detail in the ceiling. So something to really kind of look at and see how you could avoid would be what I just told you. Other than that, the light is quite impressive. The typical combination of really orange yellow colors from the cathedrals, and then obviously daylight, beautiful white ceiling. So maybe a little bit of different cropping, however still a lovely capture. Now on this one, Nikon D7000, Tamron 18-400. Now the settings were ISO 320, f6.3, 1/30th of a second. So the setting is quite good. If you're shooting still life, it's quite good practice to get a tripod for this. So then you don't need to worry about your shutter speed, and you can really bring your ISO down to 100. Unless you had some crazy light conditions, you should be able to work with that, and the tripod is always good idea here. Now it's interesting capture. The light is quite good, the reflection is quite nice. Maybe just making sure that some of the details are not there to kind of clean them up, because obviously these forks are your main subject. You can simply just remove it by cloning tool in Photoshop, or by this tool here in Lightroom. And that's about it. I think technically I like the kind of depth, I like the softness, the sharpness on the front, the softness all the way through, the reflection, quite nicely done. Similarly with the composition, I think when you shoot something like this, what you want to make sure is that you kind of have a similar, if you're working with reflection, you want to have a similar space above and below the reflection. And quite often I like to add the position of the reflection in the middle of the image. I think that usually creates very nice and balanced composition, and it works very well. So we can get something like this. Now that's about it. Now composition on this one, I think you definitely want to make sure that this as your main subject is in a center. So this could be done in geometry by using the guided geometry, and we can just pick some points of the ceiling, so something like this and something like this to start with, and then we want to make sure that this is also straight here and probably here. So that gives us a good starting point for this. And then we're gonna crop it all the way to the point which we don't need. Now I think there's a lot of yellow, and I think your main subject is the part inside. So let's crop it tighter here, and definitely on the side here. So something like this, I think. And there we have it. So you would get this nicely done, sorted and straight. Now let's just double check the geometry again. Let's zoom in on this one, making sure that we really are centered. Maybe a little bit more here. Sometimes really small details makes a big difference, especially when you work in architecture. You really want to play around with this to have it right, because it's a half of the success. And once you're done with it like this, once you have everything in a center, so I think more like this and this, then I think a good idea here would be to bring the vignette down really close, whatever is happening here, then work with the yellow to tune it down a little with something like a brush. So we can bring down the temperature and bring down the saturation and really kind of tune down this. Don't worry, we will fix it in a moment. We just highlight it now, so we know what we're working with. So something like this as a starting point. So we can bring a little bit of warmth back. We can darken it a little bit more. Let's see, a little bit of pink. And that's about it. So this is what I would do with it. You can do a little bit more inside of it, actually. You can maybe do a little bit of darkening on some parts, just to kind of highlight some of the shadows. Something like this. And there you have it. So this is where I would take it. Before and after, really kind of focusing on this part. I think it looks quite cool. I'm quite happy with it, and I would leave it there. On this one, I think it's lovely like this. Maybe I cropped it a bit too much here on the side. Different things you can do with it. Obviously, add the vignette to add a little bit more focus on the main subject. You can highlight the actual reflection with a little bit of exposure. That's always a good idea as well. So to do something like this, and that's about it. Murray, thank you very much for sending the pictures over. It was a pleasure to review them for you. Take care and send us more in the near future. And it's time to move to another photographer, Rigoberto. Rigoberto, we have 2 images here. And to be honest, I wasn't able to give you too much of a feedback on them because they are very artistic, and art is very subjective. So just from the kind of technical point, this one, obviously a lot is happening here. The green long exposure is quite cool, quite nicely done. Again, lots happening. There is lots of softness. I would probably imagine that maybe the center should be a little bit more sharp. So something to kind of look at, and making sure that it's also in a center is always a good idea if that's the kind of center of the image. So this is something I would do with it. Similar on this one, it's a great work. Obviously, with the hands and everything, that's very, very impressive. But once again, you really want to make sure that the main subject, which is something what adds to it the whole feel, is sharp, which isn't the case. She's kind of very soft, and I know it's not easy with the long exposure, but when you spend so much time on working like this, you really want to make sure that the subject is straight, even if we have one flat capture of it and then add it in. Obviously there is some post-processing done here anyway, so just kind of for the future. Still very impressive. I love the colors, I love the movement, I love the hands. Really well done. My only point for this would be the sharpness and making sure that the main subject is sharp. Also, maybe kind of just getting rid of things like this door and anything what takes away from the focus and from the attention of the main subject, which is the light and the lady. So all in all, Rigoberto, thank you very much for sending us this. Very artistic. I think it's very impressive. I would just look at the things like the sharpness and the texture and making sure that it's all in focus and it works, so you can kind of really push yourself a little bit more forward. And we continuing to the next photographer, Robden. Robden sent us 2 images which are almost like a fantasy images. Very, very cool, very nicely done. So obviously this is like from a movie, Alien vs Predator, really nicely. So I'm assuming those are maybe like a figurines. Love the sparkle, love the planet here with the moon. I think that looks very, very cool. On this one, again, excellent capture with the kind of leak, with the smoke, with the foreground, with the different glows and different textures. Put it together, it's very, very nice. I won't be able to give you too much of a feedback on it, Robden, because it's a more kind of composite and work all together. However, I love it. I think it's very impressive. Looking at it from just the regular kind of photography rules, which either apply to you or not. If this would be a real person, on this one, I would be maybe looking for a little bit more space around him. Not necessarily on the bottom, but on this part and this part. You're almost taking this from like a movie scene, and you want a little bit of moving space for the person or for the character. I think that's one thing I would look. I think the light is very cool. The sharpness is excellent. So let's just kind of look at the camera details. So Nikon's D7200, ISO 100, f5.6, 1/5 of a second, which is spot on. ISO 100 is where you want to be to avoid any unnecessary digital noise. f5.6 is cool, obviously making it look add this nice depth where maybe part of his hands are in focus, part not, then the body is. The sharpness is nice. The light is very nice as well. I'm very impressed by the kind of blue light on his forehead with the planet around. So looking at it like this, just when it comes to framing, maybe the space on the side would be something I would be looking into. Looking at this one, Nikon D750, ISO 3200, 120 millimeters, f22, 1/100 of a second. Now, I think that the 120 millimeters really work here, and I think the extra space around the figure really adds a little bit more to it. So well done there. ISO 3200 is quite high, and I mean, you can see it a little bit. However, there maybe was a texture applied to it, so I'm not really necessarily looking for it that much. f22 is also super high for this kind of photography, but that probably make you kind of wonder what was the lighting conditions when you were there, and you know that by yourself the best. As a capture, the figurine is again with very nice light, all sharp. These elements flying around looks very, very cool. Again, a little bit of depth of field created with the figure, the background, the foreground. So all in all, Robden, well done. So that's about as much as I can tell you about the two pictures. I think they're very cool. I'm a big fan of this kind of photography, even though I don't do it myself. I think it's still excellent. This is beautiful, especially the effects added. It looks great, and the rest of it is just very well handled. The colors are really nice as well. This one is almost like from a poster. This one is something else. So altogether, thank you so much for sharing them with us. If you have a time, come and join us in our group, Clever Photographer Academy. We would love to see your pictures and get inspired by them. Moving on to the next photographer, we have a Sonia. Sonia, we have 5 images from you, and unfortunately we won't be able to go through all of them. So let's just look at the ones. So for example, this young lady and maybe the guy on the horse. So let's just leave those for next time. If you want me to look at them, you're more than welcome to send them for the next episode. Otherwise, we look at those two. So let's have a look at the camera details. This one is a Canon RP with the lens 55 to 250. Now, settings, ISO 800, which is quite high. f8 with 55 millimeters and 1/400 of a second. Now the light is very nice. It's very nicely even soft light, so that's nice. ISO 800. I'm trying to kind of zoom in and see. The noise isn't that apparent, but then you get this real overall softness, which was maybe created by some post-processing. Although obviously it's all about the girl, which is extremely cute. She probably just finished some kind of breakfast. The sharpness in the eyes is really, really well done. Again, the kind of soft yellow warm works very well on this one, and I think technically it's quite well done. Talking about this one, let's see, is it the same camera? Same camera, and it looks like maybe a same lens as well. Now ISO's 160s here, so much more manageable. f8, 1/400 of a second. So 1/400 of a second. Did you get most sharply? Yes, even though it's kind of lower quality and pixelated image, it's quite good here. So obviously a nice movement here. The depth is quite visible as well. Interesting light, but obviously turning it to black and white, so maybe it wasn't that, you were not that crazy about it. Anyway, talking about composition, this is a great example of when positioning more kind of negative space behind the actual person works. I think this is because the horse and the person is about to turn, it kind of really makes sense. Now, obviously, you could have done the exact opposite. You could have this space on the other side. However, I really think that in this case, it works. It's really well done. And composition-wise, I think this is very, very pretty. I know there is a lot happening behind the person, but because it's kind of soft, it doesn't really take the attention away. And all in all, the movement and the person is well done. Now, this is obviously very kind of punched in, cropped in image-like. However, I think because of how the girl is cute and the big eyes, I think it works. So again, it's very nicely done. Now, post-processing, it's a little bit dreamy. It's not the most natural edit I ever seen in my life. However, because of her hair and the smile and obviously a little bit of the kind of foot left here, it brings a little bit of the naturality back. So in overall as a combination, I think it's quite nicely done. Yes, you could maybe add a little bit of vignette just to close it a bit more and then do some local adjustment. But I don't think I would push it any further. I think it's quite nicely done. On this one, I would make it a little bit more contrasty. So I would bring down a little bit of exposure. I think it's bright a little bit too much. Another good thing is to bring down the blacks and see what you're doing. Push the contrast up and see where to take it from there. And then just some local adjustments, things like maybe a linear gradient here on the bottom to close the image, to do something like this, and then maybe similar from the top, you know, just to close the image like this here, there. And also looking at the sky here, there is a little bit of brushing, bit visible. So again, something to kind of look at and see what you could do with it. Other than that, I think it's quite a cool picture. Well done on both of them. Thank you for sharing it with us, and keep shooting and sending pictures over. We can't wait to see them. And we have two more photographers. First of all, Stevie Brooks. We have 3 pictures here. Stevie, so as you know, 2 pictures per week. So this one is excellent. So let's not talk about it because you done a great job here. And I would just repeat how good the picture is. So let's talk about those 2. So first of all, this kind of wildlife capture, which is beautiful. Let's have a look at the camera. So Nikon D500. The lens was 200 to 500 millimeters, and the camera settings were ISO 200, 480 millimeters, so really kind of punching far, far away. F5.6, 2500 of a second. So that's why the sharpness. Gorgeous in movement with a really nice wrinkle, beautiful colors, and excellent contrast. This is, you know, over the 6 months, I saw so many pictures, so many wildlife pictures, and I'm starting to really see the pattern of one of the biggest things what makes the wildlife photo, specifically of the birds, is the background. It's the contrast, because obviously, quite smartly, these birds quite often live in an environment where they kind of blend with it, so you can't see it, where in this case it's great. I love it. Beautiful, clean, and very much like you photo with your kind of style. Really happy with it. So editing, so the technical skills on this one, great. Almost the drop coming here. The setting is brilliant. Now on this one, if I have to be honest, I'm not crazy about it, starting with the fact that the lighting really looks like it's added there in post-processing. I completely get the idea. It's supposed to be very powerful, but the first look at it and looking at the blend at the horizon, and you know that it wasn't there before. It would need a little bit more work, and I think that's where I would start. Obviously, looking at the settings, there's nothing wrong with them. ISO 200, 24 millimeter f9, 1/640th of a second. All this is sharp. I wouldn't necessarily be. I would probably go a little bit lower with the f-stop to make the main focus this. Also, I would probably make that more centered. You have lots of this kind of space on the side, but with that, let's move to the composition. I think the main subject is obviously this V here with the lightning in between. So it definitely needs to be in the middle. And I think maybe something like this would be my starting point. So you would take it from here. And other than that, as a composition and idea, I think it's great. It's just how is it executed. On this one, as a composition, is great. Obviously, a little bit more open space in front of the bird and above. The movement is there, the contrast is there, the depth is there. excellent. Post-processing also spot on, beautiful image, very natural, however very powerful. I would print this and put it on my wall all day, every day. Now, talking about this one, so definitely adding a little bit of blue in the overall thing would help. So let's make it look like more realistic. Bringing down the exposure would be another thing. Then we definitely have to close it. And even from the front, I think. So something like this would be the idea. And now we get this kind of brightness here, which could be from the lightning. We just want to emphasize it. So we create another mask, color gradient, and pop it here and really add more of this. And we want to make it a little bit blue, but a little bit brighter. Something like this, maybe a little purple. So that's what we want to do there. And I think this before, after, I think this is a little bit more realistic. You saw it didn't really take me that long at all. I mean, it's just something a little to maybe blend it more together to make it more realistic. And that's obviously there could be more done. I could keep brushing. I could do still kind of play around with the brightness on some of these parts. So, you know, something like this. Again, just kind of doing stuff to make it a bit more believable. And this is probably where I would kind of take it. So here you have it, Stevie. Thank you very much for sending it over. It's a pleasure to see your pictures as always. Always lovely ideas. It's just you have to work and practice and see where it takes you. Also, what is quite nice and a good idea is to kind of look for examples or some kind of inspiration and learn from them, see how they do stuff, and then try to repeat it is also a good idea. Moving on, the last photographer in this part of the show is Zdenek, and Zdenek brought us some beautiful giraffes and then this epic sunset. So let's have a look at the giraffes first of all. Canon 600D, 55 to 250 millimeters, and from the settings we are on ISO 100, 55 millimeters, f8, 1/320th of a second. So looking at it like this, at 1/320th of a second is a great starting point for this kind of animals. Everything is nice and sharp. That's really cool. You get a little bit of a blur on the background and the clouds, so that's quite nice as well. So technically, with a little bit of a harsh light, other than that, very nice. Now, talking about this one, we were with different cameras. So this time Canon M50, the lens was 11 to 22, and then ISO 100, 22 millimeters, f11, 1/40th of a second. Now, although it's a beautiful and powerful sunrise or sunset, there's a lot happening in the foreground here, and that unfortunately takes lots of attention away. I wonder if you could just do one step forward and use maybe this more like a leading line, if it would help. But that's already brought me to the composition. So sticking with the technical point, the detail seems to be quite nice, although the camera gives you some sort of noise even in the darker areas, even with the ISO 100. So that's a bit of a shame. Now the sun has this big starburst, which comes from the f11. And I think in this case, it works quite all right. I wouldn't be that worried about it. I think it's nice. It kind of belongs there and it's quite cool. Now, when we come to composition, so I already kind of touched on that. I would probably kind of took away or crop away a little bit of the bottom, so to probably this degree, just to kind of try to minimize and simplify the scene as much as possible. Other than that, the sun being here works quite well. Those are your kind of scale referencing points. Yeah, just wish maybe these guys would be away and then we have the clear path just to give us a little bit more flow. On this one, obviously, with the giraffes, you want to go for a portrait, which is not a bad thing. I always think when we photograph something like this and they have shadows, it's nice to include as much of the shadow as possible, but still, it's all about the giraffes. The depth is there. They have a space in front of them, so that's quite nicely done. They're looking at you, the colors are there, so it's very good. Zdenek on this one, just one thing is the color of the sky, which is a little bit unnatural for me, but maybe that's how it is. Anyway, you can always look at the color mixer, look at the blue and see if maybe with the hue we could turn it to something a little bit more natural. So maybe bring down a little bit the saturation. Maybe just trying to see what would work the best. Maybe something like this, and still bring the saturation down a little. I think another thing would be good to maybe take away a little bit of the brightness from the sky, which can be used by the select sky, and it takes a second, and then once it's done we can just bring a little bit of brightness down, and that way we really bring lots of attention to the actual animals, which I think that's what it's all about. Now let's just make it a little bit warmer, and again let's take a little bit of the saturation away. So something like this, with maybe a little bit of minus clarity to add some glow. So before, after, maybe something like this. And talking about this one, nothing much. I think it's very cool. Let's just zoom in. You're getting a little bit of chromatic aberration on the horizon. That's probably coming from your lens. Now you can go always inside of the optics and have a look at the depth range. In this case, I think the chromatic aberration is green. So what I would do, I would click on this green, use the picker and just select the green, which is here, and you see with one click it gets removed. So I think that's one thing you could do, and then just close it a little bit more, maybe with something like vignette, and that way it looks pretty cool. Zdenek, thank you very much for more wildlife. It's always a pleasure to see it, especially when we don't get to see and photograph animals like this every day. And more of the African landscape is always great to see as well. Please make sure you send us more pictures in the following week. Take care, stay safe, and hope to see and speak to you and review your pictures soon. And the same goes for all of you folks. If you want to join us for the next week's episode of the Photography Review Show, all you need to do is to head to our website, cleverphotographer.com/review, and find all the upcoming dates, links, and information about how you can join us already for the next week's episode and maybe become our Photographer of the Week. Folks, thank you very much. Take care, stay safe, and most importantly, keep shooting.